Welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following me along on my journey. So this is back to kind of like the roots of my channel, a pen from China. This is a pen that there's been some discussion about. It's listed on eBay as a Moonman M2. Here's some of the listings. And the first response you get is like, M2 for a little bit over $2 US. Wow. Obviously, it's not the same Moonman M2 that we got to know and love last year, but it's certainly an interesting take on that design. It comes in a number of different colors, bands, which is one of the things the original M2 was only in red. So that's an interesting thing, and this intrigues me, and we're going to dig down and take a look at why this pen sells for what it sells for and see if it is worth the few dollars that it costs. So it just came in this plastic case inside of a regular shipping envelope. Unlike most of the packages I get from China, this one was not done by the U.S. Post Office as well as the Chinese Post Office. There's only one label on it. So it took almost a little bit over a month to get to me, but that's fine. It is a low-end pen. But this is a nice case. Not really anything that's going to help us out there. It's a relatively new pen. It was made in November last month. This case pops apart, and we see the pen. We see a nice little pipette there to put some ink in it, because this is eyedropper only. It's held in place fairly securely by those two little protrusions there. So at the first glance, it certainly does resemble an M2 pen. And we have an M2 that makes an appearance, the original M2. So I think if you look at the cap, you'll see the first indication of why there's a difference in price is this one is injection molded and this one is turned acrylic. A little bit heavier by weight, will give you those weights. Slightly longer, slightly bigger, but not significantly. And if we look at the end of the barrel, we'll see the similar situation. Injection molded, they put some facets in there to kind of simulate that solid plug that you get from machining a rod of acrylic. As we uncap them, they take about the same turns to uncap, and we'll see that this is fairly similar in design and shape. Got a gold nib versus a silver nib, but this one I swapped out. That's a 1.1 stub in there. I did a lot of nib swapping on these when I first got them, and I was very happy with some of the swaps that I did. We have a certain type of identification there on the cap band. That's not a name I'm familiar with, but Moonman is a very familiar name. The Moonman has that standard Moonman number 5 nib assembly, and that does pull apart, as you can tell, because I replaced a nib. This one looks like it should unscrew, but it doesn't. I'm assuming it's glued in. Or maybe it's just really a tight fit, but it's more pressure than I'm willing to do to try to take it apart before I actually see how this nib works and decide whether I really want to take it apart. So we're going to do some cleaning, put some ink in here, and see if this pen writes above its $2 cost. Before we ink it up, I thought it would be good to look at this section. Here you can see the little gate from the injection molding. I'll definitely clean that off, but you do see a nice clear O-ring there above the thread, so obviously silicone grease, all of this stuff when I put it together, but I think it should work well as an eyedropper. I can't imagine this working as a cartridge or converter pen based on that design, and I'm not going to try to figure out what may or may not fit or jerry-rig something, so it'll be used as an eyedropper only like the original M2. In doing my normal pen flush, I decided to pull the nib and feed out, and it pulled out very easily, so there's no reason to really unscrew whatever assembly might be in there. And that's just your standard classic generic number 5 iridium point nib. I read a great write-up on the web about iridium point has become like Xerox and Kleenex and everything else. It's just a generic term for a nib that has some kind of tip on it. I've read that iridium comes from meteorites, which I probably should know, but I didn't. That's certainly, I think, on the fine to extra fine as far as tipping material goes. When I did my flush, this had great flow, so I'm expecting this to be a fairly wet writer. Now I got to figure out what ink I want to put in it. So this ink called out to me. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but haven't put this in a pen for a while, so I figured I'd give it a shot in Moonman M2. Here's a color card. I guess I forgot because I did too. Yeah, it's a dark green with a fair amount of blue in it, so I guess it's teal. What's really impressive is the chromatography. I mean, you got a dark, really intense blue, some yellow, a little strip of green there, and then some bright blue at the very top. I mean, that's an interesting combination. Wouldn't say that this chromatography screams teal, but you don't know what else it does. So the pen is inked up. Took less than a minute for the ink to get through and saturate the feed, and the pen started writing, and then it took a few sentences until it finally was a consistent flow, and we'll look at how that turned out. One of the problems you have with the $2 pen, it's injection molded, is you have a gate mark here that you can feel with your finger, and I'll probably just file that down. And there's one at the bottom of the barrel, the same type of thing. But again, it's a $2 pen, it's injection molded, and how you make a pen like this in a $2 range is still amazing to me. Yeah, it looks good. Tolerances all fit well. And the parts are interchangeable with the turned Moonman M2. Cap, section, barrel. You can switch them back and forth. I don't know any reason why you would do that, but you could. I've now had the pen for a few days, and I have to admit it's a reliable writer. Every time you uncap it, it just writes first time every time. I smoothed off those ends, so now they feel fine. I did as much research as I could on HYL, and I found nothing. I found one UK seller that calls this pen HYL and not Moonman M2, which everybody on eBay seems to call it. I wrote this with the microphone next to the nib so you could hear the nib on paper. And this is a very smooth, very comfortable, and I'm getting a rating of 8.7 with 1 check for writing and 1 check for design, because how could you not like the design? It is the M2 pen. How did this pen come about? I'm not going to try to theorize on it. Moonman could have sponsored this. They could have given everything to this company that injection molded it and copied the design and pumped out these pens. But at the end of the day, that's not a concern of mine. Do I like this pen? Yes. Do I like writing with it? Yes, very much. So that's what's important from my perspective. You know, if you're looking for an eyedropper pen with a fine nib that writes pretty wet, you can't go wrong with this. I mean, it has a huge ink supply. This is going to last me for maybe a year. Considering I have like 50 plus pens inked up, it's really hard to empty out one, but I do on a regular basis. So I almost forgot the detail ranking. So design, we're going to give it 2.5 checks. Engineering, it's going to get just 1 check. Injection molding, they didn't really clean it up well. And the build is 1 check. Oh, engineering is 2 checks because they did copy that design very, very well. Writing is 3 checks. Look is 1 check again because, you know, those gate marks should have been taken off. And value is 3 checks. So that's how I get to my 8.7. You may ask, Chris, are you going to compare the version of the M2 here to the original M2 and how the nib writes? And I'm going to say no. I don't have any M2s inked up. For some reason, my heart still lies with the original Lakai version, which has the blunt ends, this frosted area here in the section. And these two, I swapped the nibs out, which is what I could easily do with this new version of the M2 if I so desired. So we'll just do a quick writing example of the 2 Lakais that I have inked up. The original Lakai also posted very well. This has a Pen BBS purple glitter ink in it. It's been in there for a year and it still is a very consistent writer. I have a nice 1.1 generic Chinese stub nib in here, which they write very well. They're number 5s and they fit in a lot of pens. And this pen also had that clear feed, which I'm disappointed with wasn't in either version of the M2. And I think in this type of transparent pen, it certainly fits in well. And I find the feeds to work okay, so there's no reason to go to a black feed in my mind. I mean, this is extremely smooth, nice and wet. I mean, you can write forever with this. The balance and the weight just really has no impact on it. And you hear the cap hitting the bottom of the tripod, so we're going to remove it. No reason to write with this posted in this situation. Let's look at the other nib. So this is one of the original Lakais, which take 2 turns to unturn. The one with the 1.1 nib is that 7 turns, which made no sense to anybody, but such is what it is. I'd love to see them clone this one in an injection molded design, just because I kind of like a square end over a pointy end if I have to choose. And this has a nice Knox oblique double broad, and the nib has been ground a little bit to a slight oblique. This is that pearl glitter ink from Pen BBS. And hopefully you can see the distinct difference between this ground nib, which has a nice sharp italic writing style to it, to this 1.1 stub, which is typical of a stub. It's rounded, it's smooth, and it lays down a broader line, but doesn't give you as much line variation as you would get from this ground italic nib. Now back to the pen in the video. So we've reached the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed a look at a pen that some of you may have considered. There's certainly a ton of them on eBay. Here's a bunch of eBay listings, and they're relatively inexpensive, so how can you not take a little bit over $2 and turn it into a writing instrument like this? I think it's a no-brainer. Definitely worth your look. If you have any interest in a pen like this, eyedropper, clear, transparent, nice, juicy, fine nib. So may you have many great writing experiences, and find a pen that you like, that you can afford, that you feel good about spending money for. And when you get it, you go, wow, that was really good. This is the end of this video. We're going to say bye until the next video. And this is one of the best fine nibs I've ever written with.